Professor Suresh Kumar Sharma. He's a professor and principal at a College of Nursing, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Jodhpur. Prior to joining AIMS Jodhpur, he was professor of nursing at AIMS Rishikesh, Uttrakhand. He's currently a president of Society of Perioperative Nursing and Society of Critical Care Nursing. He became a fellow of International Council of Nurses Leadership Programs from Global Nursing Leadership Institute, Geneva. He has been part of number of national level assignment by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. For example, member of Expert Advisory Committee for Nursing Education and Research for 6 new AIMS. His areas of research is critical care nursing, diabetes, infectious disease, hepatology related to nursing. And he has been author of number of published work, including I came to know, I was looking for his background, his book on nursing research and statistics, which he published in 2014. Well, it is wonderful to have you for our panel discussion, Professor Sharma, and I would welcome you, and please share some of your thoughts. And although I know, so we wanted to have someone from a clinical background and from a medical background so that we can hear all different views. So I welcome you on behalf of everyone, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Professor Anju, for a lovely introduction. After hearing to the two mathematicians, and they have talked about different type of models and their own contribution in this pandemic, I will be just speaking from clinical perspective or core epidemiological perspective. When we talk about modeling, the mathematical model or epidemiological model or networking model, every model do the prediction, how the disease will be spreading, how this infectious disease will be spreading, how many cases has been infected, whether we have been successful in creating immunity after giving this vaccine, how many people have developed successful immunity, how many have developed partial immunity, what was the response to the different type of vaccinations. All the predictions are done by using models. Now, when these models are developed, now artificial intelligence is a new science which is predicting about these kind of informations. But still, we see none of the modeling method is perfect, and not always the modeling predictions are correct. As Professor Rao was speaking, that predictions have been fallen totally wrong about how the disease is spreading in the US. The research is happening in UK and Europe, whereas in India, the models which has been developed in West is totally are stunned now that how India had just come down from 50,000 cases to just 5,000 or 10,000 cases now. So all the models are developed based on data. Professor Anju was just saying that how the data plays a role in modeling and where the clinicians and the common man's role is very important. Now, data is coming from either the secondary source or data is coming from primary source. When data is coming from secondary source, the data is used from the past pandemics which has happened and how the similar past pandemic has spread. The understanding is collected from there and the model is created. Similarly, when the primary data is collected from a primary source, which could be prospective in nature or could be retrospective, cum prospective in nature or ambispective in nature, where the data is collected from past, present, and future, and then the predictions are made and predictions are gradually changed. So from epidemiological perspective and clinician perspective, it is very important that we collaborate with mathematicians and statisticians and epidemiologists, core epidemiologists, to provide the data from clinical perspective. For example, we are talking about efficacy of the vaccines. And we are doing the antibody test in people who had received vaccination. Or we are talking about adverse drug reactions after giving particular type of vaccines. So data capturing becomes important, and where the interface is between the patient and mathematician, the clinicians plays a very important role in capturing the clinical based data. So we have an important role there, and we can help in bringing out the right predictions. And the lot of statistics books talks about how the different mathematical model or epidemiological model are built upon and predictions are made. I just would like to share my slides and give a quick review to the students who are present here. So uh, they just get an idea about how the predictions happens. Just a minute. So hope you can see my slides.
Yes, now we can.
Thank you. So primarily, I'll be just introducing about different type of modelings which are done and what are the challenges which people who have done modeling have faced. The COVID-19 outbreak initiated from China, from city Wuhan, and eventually affected almost all every country in the world. To effectively prepare the countries for the pandemic, it was essential to estimate the disease spread and which the different modeling method has done. Different time series models have successfully managed predicting about precisely estimating about the disease outbreak. And forecasting infectious diseases happens by three baseline modeling method, that is machine learning based infection tracing and prediction model or statistical prediction recurrent neural network and long short-term memory models which draw the information from past trends. We are talking about COVID-19 now. People have used SARS, people have used MERS, people have used Spanish flu data and predicted about the COVID in 19. So we primarily use historical data here and we talk about the future trends in a new pandemic. These type of models also being used for drug and vaccine components, and now there are ICMR is underway of predicting about the immune status after this vaccine, and this type of the model is used for prediction. When we talk about statistical prediction model, we use the data from secondary source or primary source, and a statistical model is prepared to predict about a disease. And popular statistical time series prediction model used for forecasting infectious disease like COVID-19 using one-dimensional time series data set and exponential smoothing and the auto-regression integrated model average modeling is done by statistical model to predict how the disease will be progressing in the future in given situations. And if situations changes, then interplay of multifactorial the components, this is how the disease is expected, and we give the probability of this, the situation 1, situation 2, and situation 3, and so on. Epidemiological model talk about susceptibility, exposure, infected and recovered and dead patients. Initially in the pandemic, entire population remains susceptible. But later on, people start getting infected and it spreads in a population, and we predict like how disease will be spreading and or a particular type of immunity is developing in a people. Like people were talking about herd immunity in COVID-19. To understand the effectiveness of these studies in the domain, it is pivotal to understand the dynamic of susceptibility, exposure, infection, and recovered and death. This diagram talks about this, and initially everyone is suspected. There's a susceptibility of disease, then people get exposed, people get infected and recovered, and this is how the latent phase of infection over the time moves and people develop herd immunity, and then there's a sudden decline into the disease. We have seen in India the cases has decreased, and hygiene hypothesis people have talked about it, but there's other hypothesis which says that the rapid spread and rapid immunity development or innate immunity by the hygiene hypothesis is giving answers for this rapid decline. Now, technology, landscape, and primary avenues for research, because the young minds are sitting with us, they must understand that what are the avenues for COVID-19 research as per technology and science is concerned. So primary research avenues for them is forecasting and epidemiological predictions.
Dr. Sharma.
Currently, we can say that, can you
Dr.
hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir,
Slides are not moving, it seems like.
I'm not moving now.
no,
No.
sir.
No, I'll just stop it and then again do it then.
Sure.
Now it's okay.
Yes, now you can see.
Yes.
Perfect. So primary research avenues at a moment, like vaccination is going on. Different type of vaccines are going on. Different doses vaccines are going on around the globe, and everybody is interested now which vaccine is a super vaccine. What interval of second dose is important in this case. So we can forecast about whether the single dose is sufficient, whether multiple dose is sufficient, whether 2 doses are sufficient or third dose is required. What should be the interval in this? So forecasting about this, and case classification and diagnosis. The virus studies and vaccination research gives us an avenue. What we require big data. We also should track social media and news. Scotic theories also we must understand about epidemiology and immunity development in case of the infectious pandemics. Statistical modeling also we must understand. Machine learning, artificial intelligence. Understanding of this will give you avenue about the technological landscape in this pandemic to bring out the research between science and technology. Now, what are the challenges associated with COVID-19 research? The contention between the retrospectivity and prospectivity. Absence of peer-reviewed studies and randomized controlled trials, specifically drug trials and vaccine trials, because most of the vaccine trials are on very limited number of subjects, and they are very short projects which has not been a long term to monitor the adverse effects and efficacy. Now we say that these vaccines are safe, but how efficacious? The long-term data will answer this, bridging the gap between the parameters and medical applications of whatever the technology we are bringing. Impediments of comparing the dissimilar algorithms based on the mathematical models or the epidemiological models. Forecasting shift into the data set and quality control is very important. This is a major issue in most of the models which are developed. Impediments to generation to the novel settings and population algorithm biases based on the regions and the kind of data which is captured, the truthness into the data capturing, and the truthness into the data which has been reported into the past. The logistical implementation and susceptibility of security issues, because privacy of data is very important. There are a lot many apps come, the Chinese app, Indian app, and Western app. They have captured the data from people. Now, what they will be doing with this data, still we are not sure. Simulation and performance analysis is another challenge in this research. With this, thank you very much for paying your attention. And I believe that science and technology together will bring out lot many answers regarding this pandemic. This pandemic has not ended. Looking at the US, UK, and other countries, still second wave, third wave, and what is going to happen, still it is uncertain and a mystery. And these models based on it, true data, either secondary or primary, can give policy makers a direction how to move ahead. Thank you very much for your patience listening.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for this interesting view, and I think you have summarized very well from modeling perspective as well as from clinical and ground level information. Also, what is the primary data source? Sometimes we don't realize that we are using two sets of data sets. One which are current data that we have collected, or it's a previous data. So it's a mix. The current models is projecting based on those two aspects. But then also an interesting point that you made is about there is we are using a lot of internet nowadays. So there's a digital data as well, and not only clinical data that people use it, and something like a big data that you were mentioning, or artificial intelligence. That's the information that we can collect, and it could be. And again, it's the same thing that I was talking to Dr. Menon also about. That data assimilation method is a very important thing. How you are bringing different source of data into same models, and because they are collected on a different design, different thought process, and it's like apples to apples. It's not apples to apples, it's apples to bananas, and you have to make them apples to apple before you can kind of thoroughly use it. So thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for bringing that point, and also about the vaccine that you were talking. What are the challenges? We are quantitative scientists. I'm talking from my end perspectively. We think the data is easy to gather. No, there are lots of challenges in vaccine implementations also. Like as you were talking about time between doses and number of doses. I always had a question about how they decided the 2 doses, not 3 doses, not 10 doses. How do they decided that? And that's a very interesting question. And maybe it's this platform will provide us answers, maybe not answers, but at least started to talk about those issues and challenges. So thank you once again, Dr. Sharma, for this lovely talk.
My pleasure, sir.
So, well, I greatly thank you to all of the panelists for actually providing us different perspective from your experience and from your research labs research. I will now start with a panel discussion for another 50 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. And basically, I will going to ask a question from one of the panelists, and if there are responses from other panelists, we will have that one as a discussion, and then I'll move to other panelists for the second question, and so on and so forth. So this is how I will going to start. So my first question now is addressed to Professor Menon, because he was mentioning about strain variants. And so this question is about, well, there are multiple strains that are coming. Actually, I read an article, there was 23 strains that has been identified at various level. They are spreading in the population throughout the world. Does modeling studies on vaccine evaluation, for example, now we are at the stage of vaccine evaluation or strategies, are considering these multi-strain dynamics? Because I would guess the trials have been identified for older strains. And if you want to effectively implement the current vaccine programs, multi-strains are very critical right now. And although we don't, at the same time, we don't have much ideas of much empirical information on the different strains. So what can you draw light on these aspects from the modeling perspective and from the data collection perspective?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the big question is, does a prior infection with the old variant, the original strain, does it give you any protection against the new variants? That's a big question mark as far as we are concerned. It seems as though the new variants have displaced the old ones for example, in the UK, with the UK variant, with the Brazil variant. So in a sense, they tend to move faster between people. They have a higher associated reproductive ratio than the original strain. So, but it's not clear whether some of that is from people who was already earlier infected with the old strain, which would be a worrying thing, because then that would suggest that you're back to zero again. Your whole population is susceptible when the new strain comes. We don't know that yet. We really don't understand. With vaccines, the situation seems to be a little confused as far as I understand. There is some evidence that some of the vaccines work as well, or maybe just a little bit worse, on the new strains as they did on the original. But there is other evidence which suggests that they don't do well. And it's not very clear what is the right story there. In general, you might have expected that these sort of whole inactivated viruses as a platform for vaccines might do better overall, because they present multiple potential sort of sites for binding of antibodies. But that's not very clear, and unless we have better data for immune response to the new variants versus the old ones, understanding of could you be infected together? Is there a possibility of a co-infection with both the original strain as well as the variant? We don't know yet. So great questions, but we don't know enough to answer them.
So it seems like then the vaccine strategies are based on those partial informations, at least for the time being, basically.
Yeah. There is just a hope. There's just a hope that those vaccines will work equally well, or even slightly worse is also okay against the new variant. But it's not been established yet, as far as I understand.
Well, the reason this question we were thinking about is, for the flu, we have vaccine every year. So it doesn't have, I was thinking maybe if these other strains like South African strain or Brazilian strain that is now very common starts to pick up this spread, and then the vaccine are not useful at all. But I think what you are saying also is the design of the vaccine in such a way that it is covering multiple strains in some sense, basically. Is that correct information?
Yeah, that is more or less correct. And there is one sort of strong theory that what will happen is that COVID-19 will become endemic in the population. So just as with flu, you will have to every 2 years, year and a half, you'll have to have a booster shot where you look at the variants that are prevalent in the population at that time, and then you design a virus accordingly. If the sort of RNA-based vaccines are a success, then it's much faster to customize them to new variants than with the sort of standard technology. So that again is a positive. Once we know a little more about what types of vaccines work, then we can repurpose the technology used for the original strain to accommodate the new variants.
I see. Dr. Roy and Dr. Sharma, do you have any views on this response? So we were actually discussing about the multi-strain aspects and the vaccine implementation policies, how we can consider it. And I think what I'm getting an idea from what Dr. Menon has responded is, and we don't have much information on the different strains that are recently evolving or noticed, in fact, in some sense. So it would be hard to capture it in the implementation policy in models, for example, to design policies for vaccines. So anything else that you both want to add?
Are you asking whom?
From clinical perspective, I think I can add up a few things. Professor Menon has very rightly said that how many strains we have, 23 or more or less, still we are uncertain. Now, yes, this virus is a potent mutant virus. This is mutating, that is for sure. Now, how these vaccines will be behaving with mutant virus, every pharmaceutical company, clinician, or epidemiologist is assuring that, yes, the minor mutations will be taken care, but we don't know. The reason is that first, we even do not know what will be the efficacy of these vaccines and how long these antibodies are going to last. Because in clinical system, we have seen people who have infected, after 3 months, when they came for donating their plasma, there were no antibodies. After 6 months, there were never antibodies. And some of the patients, even after now 1 year of infection, they have antibodies. So still we are trying to understand that why individual person is behaving differently. Whether it is a strain specific development of antibodies. So only the time will answer these questions, whether there will be one vaccine answer for all the strains, or there will be, as Professor Menon has said, that probably it may be turned up into endemics, that these will be regional strains and this will be specific vaccine and this will work on this. So I think future will only answer these questions. Still, there are more speculations and just hope for the best kind of thing.
Sure. Dr. Roy, in terms of modeling, has people thought of these issues from the strain perspective and the vaccine strategies?
Yes, they have already thought about this. I myself was involved with the group in UK, because UK, when they started seeing the new strain, we have been collaborating anyway. Then we thought to explore the new new strain of the virus, and see if we can revise the models, especially for understanding the R naught, the basic reproductive rate. Because already in the US, we had almost all about 28 to 32 states already reported to have this new strain. India also, and UK is in a severely lockdown. And the mathematical models, I think, need a little bit of revision. But as both the panelists mentioned, I agree with both of them that still it is not very clear. And usually for in general, for any vaccine, not just for COVID, any vaccine developers would assume that there is some evolution. There is some evolution of the new strains. That's the part of assumption. They don't just construct the vaccine just for one particular strain. That's part of the vaccine game anyway. So usually for flu, in case of flu, usually until March and April every year, October the flu season starts, and until March, April they have this what you call the flu season. And by end of March and April, they see the predominant strains until that particular season, and then they start preparation for the next year's vaccine for the flu shot. So that means they are already the vaccine developers, and there also a lot of the specificity, sensitivity issues are there, and some Bayesian. I myself was involved in the Bayesian paradigm to understand the sensitivity of the viruses. So that all been taken care for. Similarly for Covaxin or all the other vaccines which are there for a particular COVID, they are all being taken care. The virus mutations are being taken care while they're building the vaccine. But as both Dr. Menon and Dr. Sharma both mentioned, they are right, because we still don't have any data collected on the main vaccine itself. So unless the data on the main vaccine is not there, the data on the mutations, all these things are not. The hope, as I mentioned rightly, there is a hope that this vaccine would work even for the variations, but the rapidity of the transmission is higher for these new viruses, strains.
Okay. Well, thank you, all three of you. I'll move on because we are talking about vaccine. So the second question is also on a vaccine. So this is for Professor Sharma. So recent study that I just saw a few days ago, which is on Oxford vaccine. And they were saying the vaccine efficacy has been increasing if the time between the doses increases. And so actually it increases from 54% to 82% from few days to few weeks. If you increase from 6 weeks to 12 weeks, 54% efficacy to 82% efficacy. So what is there any common consensus from the role of timing between doses? Have been that kind of studied in the trials? What these timing between doses will do, the long-term implication on vaccine programs, for example?
I think this is a very important question because there are two schools of thought between virologists. Many virologists worry that extending the dose interval might result in millions of the people with only partial immunity. As they wait for their second dose, the potential breeding ground for vaccine-resistant mutants will occur. And lengthening the dose interval from 3 weeks to 3 months could speed the emergence of such mutants by creating a pool of sub-immune people who have enough antibodies to slow the virus and avoid developing symptoms, but not enough to wipe it out. Those people might incubate viruses with mutants and that allow them to dode the vaccine-induced antibodies, for example, by changing the amino acid sequence at site where antibodies previously bound, preventing the virus from invading into cell and replicating. There are chances that vaccine-resistant virus strains will result from this. But evolutionary biologists who use computer modeling to generate the scenarios for virus escape from vaccines say that there aren't enough data for compute this still hypothesis risk. And any single mutation is unlikely to send vaccines ineffective fulminating. So there are two schools of thought that there could be big gap and there should not be big gap. But at the given time, we understand that this data is only on small number of people. And this data says that there was a significant difference when the interval was increased from 54.9% to 82.4%. But only with larger data and from different continents, we will be able to answer this question.
I see. Dr. Menon and Dr. Roy, do you want to add something what Dr. Sharma said?
No, that's a very good point. And I think particularly the only thing I want to add is that we do need studies on the Indian population, because we don't know how the Indian immune response and how it's conditioned may differ from Western. All of these studies that we know are on Western populations, typically older. They don't typically on, not necessarily on children, but children are very important because of the general young age of our population. So it's a very good point, I think.
Sure. So I think what I'm understanding is there is a trade-off. There's a trade-off of vaccine efficacy, but then causing many strains to evolutionary behavior. And there's a competition between probably the strain will going to mutate more rapidly if the dose will going to increase. I mean, the timing between the dose will increase. And this is, I have not thought on those ends, and this is very interesting view. And as he was mentioning, Dr. Sharma, that there has been some evolutionary computing models in the past that I have seen it myself, that might be useful in understanding some of the aspects or understanding in terms of COVID-19. So anyway, I'm moving forward with the third question. And again, we are still on the vaccine. We are talking, this is the main debate nowadays. Well, there is some news on vaccine providing selling their health data, the individual health data. So and this is a question to Dr. Roy. So there is a need for a better health policies, and will that be having actually an implication to modeling studies? Now, when I talk about these privacy aspects, but I also talk about data evaluation. That means we use the data from the literature or from the published word without many times checking how authentic these data are collected and what are the assumptions that are going in it. And so what are the challenges associated with because these empirical information is changing very rapidly in terms of a COVID. So these issues of data ethics and data evolution, when it comes down to models, how rigorously we have been following, and what are the challenges associated with it?
Thank you, Dr. Mobai. I think this is a wonderful question. I'm very much closely associated with this sort of debate on the data quality since past 15 years at least. When the HIV, I still remember, when the HIV models, when I was working for the World Bank as a consultant, and many of the World Bank scientists were, they are pushing that, India, this is around 2004, 2005. At that time, they are pushing, that India would have 60 million HIV cases, by end of 2006. So these are 2002. So I was working that time with the government, but then I was working for the part of as a consultant of World Bank. So the data actually, these major journals like Lancet, I'm just openly quoting that, or even they try to have some agenda in a sense, some of, it came in the newspapers also. Some of the scientists who work for the academia in the Europe, they were also consultants for some pharmaceutical companies. Both ways, the conflicts of interest were not properly taken care. So the same individuals who have been paid by the vaccine developers are also part of the modeling groups of the governments. So that means they try to promote the number of cases like antiretroviral therapy. They wanted to sell to the developing world. So they hype the numbers. They want to, even the World Bank. So I was very strong vocally within the modeling groups. I never accepted. So that's the reason that although I was part of the World Bank group, World Bank consultant, but then the government of India wanted to have their own models. So that's how I was roped in, and then, we have our own. And I said that, India would never cross 3 million HIV cases. That was my prediction. And I mean, prediction means it's not individual, it's based on all the mathematical exercise, everything. And it never touched the 3 million even today. So the 60 million was that's what the agenda that time. They want to push that on India, that it will be more number of cases for India, and then so that they can sell the drugs, sell the drugs means and sell the treatments, all they dump on the done, not just for India, many developing world. This is what the agenda, that's what the data quality, the mathematical, we don't know because mathematicians sitting in any university department, typical academic department, they would blindly take the data, publish it from a medical journal, from the any leading medical journals, and they assume that it's true. The beta values, the transmission dynamics, I was involved with the transmission dynamics for HIV, practically looking at the data, how to compute. Even one of the study, the antiretroviral therapy, those years, that's called, the heart therapy. So they were conducting that kind of studies on the couples, husband positive and wife negative, or wife negative, wife positive, husband negative. And they're studying that kind of studies on them just to get the beta value. See how selfish that is. To know the beta value, they would not tell the husband or wife in Africa that, one of them is positive and one of them is negative. And they give treatment to them. So then they publish eventually in one of another leading medical journal. Later, that was that particular principal investigator was removed from the job from the US, and then so the ethical values are very important. Ethics of, because just to test the impact of the treatment, they did not tell one of the couple that HTPN 52, some study that's a very well-known study published in that's again published in Lancet. So this sort of things, sensitize the Indian researchers, especially mathematicians, statisticians. We need to sensitize them that anything published need not be on the data, need not be true. So the quality checks, all that, I think the government of India, that we all need to make sure that, that this part of the ethical values are being sensitized. And it's nothing wrong believing them, because they were not aware of the international, the bigger game of the vaccine developers or pharmaceutical industries.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Dr. Menon, Dr. Sharma, do you want to add something? So the question is about data privacy and also data evaluations. Are we, as a modelers, are thinking from those ends? And if so, how we are doing it and to what extent we are doing it?
Right, that is a genuine worry. And certainly ethics committees are supposed to take care of issues like this. That's why we have committees that screen all of research that is intended to be done on people to make sure that it's appropriately anonymized. That I think will become increasingly important in the future. Okay. One concern would be not just scientists, but government. Government is storing large amounts of data. For example, the ICMR has data on every patient who has developed COVID-19. And is that data being stored securely? Are the protocols in place to ensure that privacy, there is no disruption of conflicts of interest is another sort of serious issue, especially for vaccines. If the people in charge of testing vaccines are also the people who are charged with evaluating them at a government level, then it sets up a genuine conflict of interest, which again we should be careful about.
Dr. Sharma, do you want to add something on it?
I think Professor Rao and Professor Menon has sufficiently talked about this issue, and this is a very important issue globally. And the bigger organizations must be very sensitive about it.
Okay. Well, these aspects in clinical courses are covered. In biological sciences, they are covered because you have to go through institutional review board to clear this thing. But are the math department or statistics department or quantitative science departments students are kind of getting this ideas or this understanding about it during their training programs? I mean, it's a follow-up things that I think I always struggles with working with collaborators in my field, for example, in applied mathematics.
So the answer, Anuj, is no in India, that usually a graduate student does not have to do this. But there is, as part of every PhD, there is a methodology course, which in principle should include things like this. So all PhD students in India are required to do a methodology course. And often it's interpreted to mean statistical analysis, library usage, computer usage, etc. Maybe there will be a little bit of small module on harassment and other things, but in principle, they should also include ethics of research, ethics of informed consent. That is not there, as far as I know, in most places, and that's certainly something to do.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Roy, in US has been the case, or well, it is only India that we are not having these courses, for examples. In US, students in quantitative sciences are going, they have these methodology courses where data ethics and data evaluations have been a part of the training.
Well, anyone who have to handle the student or postdoc or faculty, if they have to handle a data, they have to go through a training called CITI or HIPAA. Irrespective of their role in the university, their faculty, student, if they are part of a study, they have to go through the training. The university will take care, because when you write a grant application, when I ask for the data, to collect some data, that data request has to go through the IRB, as you rightly mentioned, Dr. Mumbai, and then they take care whether I am eligible. Did I have a pass through that? So IRB will take care of my eligibility part, and then our rest of the investigators are all safe, because if I'm not done, IRB will block me and they say that you have to pass this course. That test him a little bit of then after that only they will allow me to collect the data, irrespective of my job. And if I'm a private person anyway, then I don't know, if I have no job, nothing, still I have to collect the data, human data. If I have to collect human data or animal data, any data I would collect, I think there is some rules are there which I'm not aware of if I'm a private person. But it's not a big deal to incorporate that, as Dr. Menon was telling, research methodology. I think he's right, because research methodology is being taught, and through that module, I think this can be incorporated into the just to give an overview of through this kind of procedure, data ethics, like HIPAA. I know, for example, I handle a lot of COVID data, very sensitive data. I know who are the colleagues, my colleagues, who are positive, who are negative, but I should not even talk to them. How are you doing? Kya kar rahe ho? Abhi tumhara tabiyat kaisa hai? No, it's not allowed at all. Even I know that, who is who, but that's a courtesy. Even with the students, I see that's a very important. Recently, when I gave a talk in one of the IIMs in India, I also mentioned them before COVID. I went to visit it physically. I mentioned that also the student ethics, like a student score. This is a little bit out of context, but student scores also in India, we should not share with one student score with other student who is a topper, who is not topper. Like if I teach a batch of 30 students in my class, and if one of them is a topper and one of them is a last grade, like a lowest grade, a lowest score, we should not even tell who is a topper publicly in the class, because that means that other people who are not toppers. So we have no right, as a teacher, we have no right to discriminate them based on their performance. We have to give a human values to them, which has been, India is a country with human values. Like someone was telling other day that, we have the ancient Sulabha Sutra time onwards. We have ancient some of the things like Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramaya. So these all then we value human. We give a human value. We don't need to be taught what is a human development index for the Indians especially. That we need to restructure them according to our suitable suitable curriculums. And we are all naturally there. We are abide by the laws. So that HIPAA little bit of known, awareness need to be created among the data users.
Thank you, Dr. Raw. So I will continue further with the vaccine itself. The next question is, maybe I'll address it to Dr. Menon. Vaccine hesitancy has been a topic of some of the news articles, which has been very high in some places versus others, and could be of different causes, reasonings. Especially the models that you were talking about for evaluating non-pharmaceutical interventions, are you, or in general, the mathematical modelers have been incorporating vaccine hesitance rates, or even that we have any of these data available that we can start to incorporate, because this will become quite critical in fulfilling from. I mean, so we have multiple interventions. How these interventions will be implemented, or what level of efforts one should put in each one of it.
So there are some surveys right now on what are the populations that might be vaccine hesitant, what is the level of vaccine hesitancy. And it's a bit unusual because in India, there is no sustained anti-vaccination movement, unlike the US and some parts of France and other countries in Europe. So some part of it is sort of genuine, this sort of evaluation of relative risk. You want to check that some people have already got the vaccine, and if they look okay, then you will go ahead and take it, and then take it. I think the numbers so far have been fairly unambiguous. Vaccination is safe. If you look at the number of fatalities or adverse events, that is a relatively small number of the total fraction of the total number who have been infected. This is the message that I think needs to go out. Already, a large number of people have been vaccinated. Already, we know that only a very small fraction of them have had adverse events. These are, as far as we know, not causally linked to the vaccine. And the regulator who is in charge of examining the adverse events in India has said he will be completely transparent. And for each of the events, he will publish the reasoning why this should or should not be attributed to the vaccine, which I think is a positive. So to an extent, I think this will change in time. There's an initial hesitancy with every vaccine program. We'll have to see what happens after another 3 weeks to a month, and then see whether what will happen. We might have to restructure, maybe not waste vaccine shots, but find a new population to give it if it turns out that healthcare workers are a little more hesitant at this point. So that needs sort of clever thinking of what might be the right way to intervene and at what point. But I would think that because we don't have a sustained anti-vaccination groups in large scale, I think the number will pick up.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. But maybe Dr. Sharma has, since he's on the medical side, may have a better idea of what might happen.
Sure. Dr. Sharma, please, any views on it?
I think Professor Menon has rightly talked about it and rightly speculated about it. I agree with his opinion.
Okay. Dr. Roy, you want to add something to?
Yeah. So this is an important point, because vaccine drive have to reach a large number of population. In India, more than 90% of the people speak their mother tongue and read the information from their mother tongue. So one of the things recently with the government and various politicians, when I communicated with them in a sort of group meetings, then I wrote a written proposal to the government of India, is that to have the vaccine information in all the languages, at least on those languages which are printed on the currency note, 18 or 19 languages printed on the currency note, all the languages, the vaccine information need to be reached. Various media, newspapers, government orders or everything have to be reached. So already in that direction, already some work has started. And then I've been in regular touch on these aspects. And then because the English is spoken in very, very little, very, very minor population. Just because we are academician communicating doesn't mean that English is a mainstream language in India. People read and write in their own languages. So languages are being very important, and government also, the Vijnana Bharati and other, they are taking a lot of care in nurturing the languages, and Sanskrit has been now being resurfacing in various. Hindi is very closer to the among all the languages, Hindi and Gujarati, Bengali. Some of these are very closer to the Rajasthani, closer to Sanskrit, still surviving. So government of India is doing like a new education policy we have to survive the languages. So in that connection, the vaccine also strategies. So the NASCOM, through that, some work already been started. So I'm seriously involved in understanding making the vaccine information available to the common man. Because common man, to make the drive more exciting and more meaningful, the vaccine drive, it's not easy. It's not easy because already a lot of resistance, as the panelists mentioned rightly, or perhaps Dr. Mubai, you mentioned, that it's not easy in the US right now. A lot of this thing is faced resistance. It's ignorance. It's nothing that, the information is not, it's not intentionally, they are anti-vaccinators, nothing like that, but the ignorance. So same thing, why not it could happen back in India? So a lot of vegetable sellers or tea shoppers or those who don't know, not knowing English is not their curse. They should not be ignored. All the people who speak regional languages need to be considered. So that I think government is coming in a big way to all the translations. All the state governments have their own translators, so they should be employed to translate the vaccine information and reach the common people. If we are, because unless, in my opinion, 80% people of India, or at least those are risk, they have been vaccinated. At least if this is really gone out of the population, fine. If their virus is still circulating, then they are all population can be protected. And it's not an easy job. 80% of the risky people get vaccinated. It's not at all an easy task.
Sure.
I have one more thing to add.
Sure.
Yes, it is very important to have the public awareness, but I believe that before that, we need to have our own scientific data to convince the think tank, so they can be brand ambassadors about it. And we should publicly largely publish this data and openly communicate, yes, this is the safety of this vaccine, this is the efficacy of this vaccine, and this is the scientific model. And then I think people will definitely follow it, and larger drives will be successful, because there's a lot of hesitation, there's a lot of doubt about it. And even the educated people are still speculating whether I should take or I should not take it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right. That's true. Thank you, all of you. Maybe very quick two more questions, which are related to more educational understanding and from a modeling perspective. This is for Dr. Roy. When do you use these different types of models? I mean, is there a formula for it to when to use mathematical models versus statistical models versus physical models? Can you kind of describe these things when you start to work on these models? What is your driving force? What is guiding you in the work?
Yeah, this is a typical academic question. I really love this question because a lot of students are there in this thing. All the panelists anyway, they know the answers for that. On the faculty, they all know it, what I'm saying. But then for the students, when I look at I take up a model, any modeling, it comes to my mind what sort of model technique I used to use. I want to use. It never comes to my mind. The question comes to me always is how to solve it. So for solving it, you need to use the method whatever it requires. You don't have to stick always to the mathematical model, or you have to stick always to stochastic model. You have to always stick to the statistical model. The data, whatever the question you are aiming, what are the goals of the model, what are the aims of the research, that drives me to come up with that particular method. For example, like we want to understand the quantitative numbers of COVID impact of vaccination, then the mathematical models would be more closer. Suppose I want to ask them, what is the chance of, if you pick up this example I told in other my COVID talks also. Suppose we stand in the Connaught Place in Delhi, and then we randomly pick an individual and ask that, and we want to know whether that particular individual, what is the chance that or probability that a particular individual will have a coronavirus in the body. Then the mathematical model would not work for that coming up that kind of framework. So that kind of framework, we need to have a stochastic framework to come up and say that how do we decide the population whom to be selected, and then that random selection part comes in the statistical design. And once the random selection is done, then the model for deciding the probability of having a coronavirus, that comes from the stochastic part, stochasticity. So I cannot strictly say that I love SCIR models, or I love SIR models, or I love some PDE models. My love towards certain models would not give me an answer for the question what I'm handling. So that we should, as a modeler, we should not be biased for any particular modeling type. We should be biased only for the aims of the study.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Dr. Menon, Dr. Sharma, do you want to add some things on it? How you have been in your
I agree with that. I agree with that point, that you should not be biased by the technique that you're most familiar with. You should understand what is most suitable for the problem that you want to study.
Okay. Dr. Sharma,
Professor Rao and Professor Menon both said that it is not very important to choose a particular type of modeling. The intent and outcome is very important, but yes, when we are predicting about number of cases, we can go for mathematical modeling. But when we are talking about prediction of efficacy of drug vaccine, we can go for statistical modeling. Thank you.
So the next question is for Dr. Sharma. What is the difference between science research and practical? This is from a student perspective we have designed. And when we talk about science research versus practical research, so in US, there is two agencies, funding agencies. There's one called as the National Science Foundation, and there's the other one called as National Institute of Health. And you want to have different type of proposal in that. So related aspects is like, can you describe like the role or the level of translational science in educational system and in interdisciplinary research?
Yes, let me first answer the question of NSF and NIH. NSF supports fundamental biomedical research that adds to the body of knowledge of science per se and biomedical science per se. And if I talk about NIH, which supports the health-related exploration and application of fundamental biomedical research into practices. Both expect research that is highly innovative, has cutting edge, and potentially transformative. Contribution to the body of knowledge of the science and can move the data and provide the data for answering the current questions and projecting about future. If I talk about translational research, which includes two areas of translation. One is in process of applying discoveries generating during the research in laboratory and in preclinical studies to the development of trials and studies in humans. The second era of translation concern our research aimed to enhancing the adoption of the best practices in community, cost-effective for prevention and treatment strategies, and also an important part of translational science. Now, we believe that when translational research is conceptualized as a process of moving from bench to the bedside, it represents the movement towards goals to improve the health. It may evoke the image of a patient receiving medical care or image of healthy individual benefiting from the improvement in the healthcare or public health. Alternatively, it may suggest patient-oriented research. We can call it as research at bedside, is the key step towards the improvement in the treatment and prevention of disease. So in nutshell, I can say one is the science which is working for improving the clinical care, and one is science which is working for prevention of disease and a promotion of health.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Dr. Menon, Dr. Rao, do you want to add something to it?
No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So I want to add here that, as Dr. Sharma rightly mentioned, translation research is about bed to bench, bench to bed. That's how. So whatever we understand from a patient perspective, we need to take it to the research level. Okay. Be it theoretical or experimental or theoretical experimental combined, bed to bench. And bench to bed, whatever we find research in the labs or theoretically, we want to go and take it to the patient population to test it. So that's the advantage of the bed to bed, bench to bed, and then theory and these two, the balance between these two should be taken care in appropriate way, so that because health research is done for the public. Mm-hmm. So translation is very much important. Translation. I think it's coming up very rapidly in India. I mean, it's already there. It is already there. That new name, many of them are already been, this in translational science. I remember meeting Dr. Menon. We all 2 decades ago, almost. He invited me to IMSC Bangalore. That itself. A lot of we are all that time beginning the mathematical modeling. Kind hospitalities, the interest he has shown those days, I still remember. That means 2 decades are there. Translations, things are still very much, pretty much there in India now.
Well, thank you, all of you. Maybe in the interest of time, I would request all three of you to give a concluding remarks on, at least for our students here, what you have in one few sentences, if you can, please. So maybe we can start with Dr. Gautam Menon first.
I think this is an exciting time to be doing mathematical biology, mathematics, mathematical epidemiology at this point. I mean, I think the world has woken up to the fact that we must treat infectious diseases, potential pandemics of infectious diseases very seriously. I think where departments should do more is in training. We should not train our students to be just mathematicians. We must teach them a little bit of ecology, a little bit of what is required on the biological and clinical and medical sides. What is immune response? What, the complexities of the human, I mean, as a subject of research, that is probably the most interesting and fertile area because so little is known from a mathematical point of view about that. So I think departments should change. I think students should be willing to learn more and move out of their zone of confidence. And we should find problems that are in close discussion with people like Dr. Sharma who work on the clinical side to find good problems that we can do, that we can contribute to, and also that are very Indian. It's no use solving problems of South America or Europe or something. We have to look at neglected tropical diseases in India where we can make a difference, which because we have the local expertise and the knowledge and the connection with clinical groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Menon. Dr. Sharma?
Yes, I'll say that this is the time for translational and interdisciplinary research. Professor Menon has very rightly said that we should come together. We should bring out a practical problem for you. And from mathematician and the technological experts, we should be together to find an answer for questions. And now all world has realized that investing on health is very important. Developing warfares, developing technologies, yes, those were priorities, but now health is a priority. And I will say this with a great responsibility that probably COVID-19 is just an alarming bell. Many more such viruses are going to come in this Kali Yuga. And this is probably a Kalati avatar, which the philosophers has said this. And together we need to be prepared for a protection of health by prevention of disease and promotion of health of the people by bringing science, technology, and mathematics together to answer these questions and be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Dr. Roy?
Yeah, I think, I agree with both the panelists, Professor Menon and Professor Sharma. This is a time for collaborative research. And we need to promote that at the universities and the major institutes in India. I myself benefited being sitting in a biological laboratory. I didn't understand anything until I was sitting with them, looking at the genes, viruses. And I used to teach pure mathematics, like complex analysis, renal analysis, differential equations, those type of courses in ISI Kolkata, and I teach stochastic process, set theory, all these things. But then I would like to sit down along with the non-mathematicians and to see the research, understand them, and they also need to have some interest in the mathematics, mathematical sciences. Still, mathematics offers a lot of the imaginative and the in-depth insights into the biological questions. Still math rules the basic the overall framework, designing a well constructed framework. But yet the biology is more tougher. Medicine is more tougher subject than mathematics. Mathematics so easy in a sense. Mathematics, however deep mathematics is, it is being created by humans. But a human can never create a small rat. Even today, we cannot create a mosquito. A human cannot artificially create a mosquito. So to fly. So that means biological sciences is much more tougher, much more advanced than the mathematics. Mathematics is just a tool. So in that kind of the overall perspective, the universities, as they mentioned, the designing had to be done, like the intra. That's why I think the ICERs have been started. I think government is doing a great job. New institutes are set up to mix these populations. Thank you, Dr. Mubai. I want to really thank you for bringing such a wonderful questions and working hard. Professor Dharmendra Tripathi is amazing. Professor Jai Prakash Tripathi also amazing. You all have a great teamwork here. Yeah, I really enjoyed being in this with very eminent panelists and myself interacting with all the members.
Well, it is because of you all panelists that this has been possible. Accepting our request, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think what you all are talking about and we discussed about is that changes in the training programs in some ways so that interdisciplinary outlook can be well incorporated into it rather than a one particular field. But then also from a current pandemic outbreak, one of the things that is very critical is the inequalities that has been now in a much more higher level because of the current pandemic situation. Some people are getting resources much more easier than others, and gender inequalities, for example. These aspects we come to know when we later on in the research rather than in our academic training, for example. So I think these things has to be part of, and that is what you guys are mentioning about, has to be ingrained in our educational system, that when we come into a professional world, we are full-fledged in multiple dimensions. Tackling a real life problems is not one discipline, it is a multiple discipline skill set. So at the end, thank you all for being here, for accepting our invitations and giving us such a wonderful perspective on different angles. We could not have done this workshop without your inputs and without your motivations for us. So thank you very much. I thank you all on behalf of the whole organizing committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So with that, I will end the panel discussions. So thank you all attendees to be part of this panel discussion. We will have a recording available for this panel discussion for later for you to watch. And I know there has been many questions in the chat message which I was unable to cover because of the time constraint. But I hope that we will continue these activities in futures, and it will going to help all of us together learning on these aspects. So thank you, all attendees and the panelists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.